within 18 months. It's simply not good enough, is it?
Yeah. Well, Mr. Speaker, we continue to upgrade the prison estate and, as I say, investing in 20,000 new places, the biggest expansion in the secure estate since the Victorian era. At the same time, we've been taking out some of our most overcrowded and unsuitable prisons. Just last financial year, we took out 1,900 places, and we're investing £168 million in custodial maintenance for 23, 24 and 24, 25. And she mentioned reoffending. I am pleased to say that there is no good level of reoffending but zero. But I am pleased to be able to report good progress on reoffending, which has been coming down as a result of more ex-offenders getting into employment, fewer of them being homeless, and more being able to get suitable, good treatment for addiction.
Sir Robert Neal, Chair of the Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Justice Committee is proposing to hold an inquiry into future prison population and estate capacity. I look forward to the Minister giving evidence to us about that. He will know that that is prompted in part by concerns that overall overcrowding in the adult male estate, is some 23%, much worse in many of the old local prisons, and that whilst he is right to draw attention to the government's new prison building programme, even if that were all completed on time, there would, according to figures we have seen, be a shortfall in March 2025 of about 2,300 places as against anticipated demand. What is going to be done to deal with that? And should we have a proper conversation with the public about what is a reasonable expectation of what can be done in prisons and what is the best use of prisons and who should be there?
Well, Mr. Speaker, on my right honourable friend's last point, of course we must constantly be having an intelligent, constructive public debate about these matters. But look, on the question of capacity, on projections, they change, of course, and there are many complex factors at play. I look forward, as ever, to joining his committee, to being scrutinised on that point. But specifically on crowding, I do think it's important to note crowding, doubling up in cells, has for a very long time been a feature of our prison system. And if you look at crowding overall, Mr. Speaker, it is 2,000 fewer than it was when we came into government in 2010.
Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Between January 2019 and December 2022, we removed 13,851 foreign national offenders from the country, and as my honourable friend rightly suggests in his question, that is all about close working with colleagues, close working with the Home Office.
Luke Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And we've all seen the stories of convicted foreign criminals being pulled off planes at the last minute. Now, with the Nationality and Borders Act was brought in to improve the process of returning criminals, speed up that process, increase the window for removal of foreign national offenders from prison under the early removal scheme. Could my right honourable friend comment on how this is working, how he expects this to affect the numbers, and how he expects the process to be sped up?
Under the Nationality and Borders Act 2022, as he mentions, we expanded the FNO early removal scheme window from 9 to 12 months, allowing for earlier removal, and we're working closely with the Home Office on that. In May, we also agreed a landmark new deal with Albania, and we're working to negotiate new prisoner transfer agreements with EU member states and other countries.
Jim Shannon.
Can I thank the Minister very much for that response? In Northern Ireland, it has been reported that the proportion of Northern Ireland's total jail population who hail from outside the United Kingdom and Ireland is disproportionately high. The figures indicate that there are some between 7 and 9% per year. Has the Minister had an opportunity to assess that with the Department of Justice back home? Thanks so much.
Mr. Speaker, of course, the way we are organised, we don't cover the prison service in Northern Ireland, as the honourable gentleman knows. But it is very important that we stay in close touch. And though I have not had that specific conversation recently with colleagues in Northern Ireland, no doubt there'll be opportunities in the future.
Matt Rodder.
Number 9, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The sale of Reading Prison is proceeding, and barring any unexpected complications, completion is expected later this autumn.
Matt Robert.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. May I thank the Minister for his answer and also for meeting me and the Right Honourable Member for Reading West recently to discuss this. Reading Jail is a hugely important historic building. Now, nearly 13,000 people across Berkshire have signed a petition asking the government to work with me and with the local arts community to turn the jail into an arts hub. Will he now reconsider the government's approach? It has taken them a long time to discuss the proposed sale with their preferred bidder, and no progress or slow progress appears to be being made. Will he now reconsider, and will he work with me, Reading Borough Council and the local arts community to save this wonderful building?
Well, Mr Speaker, the sale is progressing, and any proposed development, of course, would be subject to approval from Reading Borough Council Planning Department, and of course the usual due diligence requirements and so on will apply. Mr Speaker, we quite often throw around the term doughty campaigner in this chamber, but I can certainly say that in respect of the honourable gentleman and my right honourable friend, his neighbour, the member for Reading West, they have indeed been incredibly assiduous in their attention to this matter on behalf of their constituents, and in turn I commit to him that we will absolutely stay in touch.
Johnson.
Number 11, sir.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It's right that those convicted of a crime face up to its consequences by being in court when they are sentenced. On the 30th of August, the Lord Chancellor announced his intention to legislate as soon as parliamentary time allows on judges being able to order an offender to attend court for sentencing, making clear in legislation that reasonable force can be used to compel this, and that refusal to comply with a judge's order will cause the offender to face up to 2 years in custody.
Thanks, sir. In 2014, Colin Ash Smith was convicted of murdering 16-year-old Claire Tiltman in my Dartford constituency. His final insult to her was to refuse to attend the sentencing hearing. So can I welcome the proposed changes to compel defendants to face up to the consequences of their actions? And can the Minister confirm, though, that there will be an opportunity for judges to hear representations from the prosecution, defence and security staff before such action is taken?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend, and I hope he'll allow me this opportunity to express my sympathy to the friends and the family of Claire Tiltman, his constituent who was tragically murdered in 1993, or lived in his constituency. I was glad to see her murderer brought to justice after so many years. Colin Ash Smith, as with Lucy Letley, was cowardly for not attending the sentencing hearing to face up to his appalling crime. Each case is different, so it's important that the court and the judge have discretion in how to make an attendance order. And in reaching that decision, although we're working through the details of this, we would expect the courts would consider the full circumstances of each individual case, including any representations made by the prosecution or the defence in that context.
Greg Thomas.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. If we want offenders to attend their sentencing, it does rather help if the court is open. Harrow Crown Court was closed 2.5 weeks ago because of the discovery of crumbling concrete wreck, with no indication as yet of any timescale for it to be reopened. Its closure will inevitably exacerbate the backlog of criminal cases in the London area and prevent victims of crime seeing justice. Could the Minister provide quickly an update on the progress at getting Harrow Crown Court modernised, fully repaired and open again?
Thank you. Well, I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman, and particularly the dexterity with which he got Harrow Crown Court in. He's right to highlight that case. I understand that remedial work is underway, that cases that were listed there have been transferred to other London courts to ensure they continue to still be heard, and I understand from my honourable friend that the indicative timescale to complete the works is 6 to 9 months.
Can I welcome the Shadow Minister Kevin Brennan to say he'll be quieter on the back benches and doubt he'll make it up on the front. Kevin Brennan.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Speaker. I suspect the Minister might anticipate what I'm going to ask him, because I'm beginning to think the department should be renamed the Department for Justice Delayed. But, you know, Labour proposed that we change the law on attendance sentencing back in 2022. Just last month, the Leader of the Opposition said that we were prepared to amend the relevant legislation if there was no action. So why is it taking so long for the government to intervene on behalf of victims and their families?
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman, and may I take the opportunity to welcome him to his place. I suspect there will occasionally be to and fro's across this chamber, but I hope there will also be opportunities where we are in agreement to be able to work constructively together. We've been clear in our intention to bring forward appropriate legislation to reinforce the existing powers that the judiciary have in this respect, but it's important we get this right, and it's important that it builds in that degree of judicial discretion, because there may be some circumstances where victims would not wish to see the offender in court for sentencing because it would be deeply distressing or deeply disruptive. So it's important that we get this right. We are determined to do that, but we will work through the detail to make sure it is robust and effective.
Greg Smith.
Question 13, sir.
Mr. Speaker, we have recently seen indications of an improving national staffing picture in prisons, with an increase of 700 full-time equivalent band 3 to 5 prison officers and youth justice workers in the year to June 2023.
Greg Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful to my honourable friend for that answer, but the damning report into HMP Woodhill, just adjacent to my constituency, was clear that staff shortages were a huge factor in the serious issues that prison faces. It's equally well known that HMP Spring Hill and HMP Grendon in my constituency have faced recruitment challenges. And in that light, if we can't staff the prisons that we do have, surely it's unworkable to carry on with my right honourable friend's totally unwanted plans to build a new mega prison in my constituency, and that planning appeal should be withdrawn.
Mr. Speaker, I am grateful to my honourable friend who takes a very close interest in these matters, and rightly so, particularly on behalf of his constituents who are prison officers and other staff in and around his constituency. I can assure him we're working urgently to address the findings, the urgent notification at Woodhill. I think we'll also come on to that perhaps a little later in questions with our honourable friend. And the Lord Chancellor will, as ever, be publishing an action plan by the end of the month. We also have active recruitment campaigns in place for Grendon and Spring Hill, and are seeking to increase numbers by incentivised recruitment.
Carmichael.
Number 14. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recognise there continues to be work to be done to improve conditions in some magistrates' courts for the users, and that's why we have boosted the capital investment programme to £220 million over the next 2 years to March 2025 to improve the quality and enhance the resilience of the court and tribunal estate, allowing us to plan major projects much more in advance and with certainty. The improvements will ensure that those on the front line of the justice system will benefit from buildings that are more accessible and sustainable.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We speak of access to justice, meaning the availability of legal advice and representation, but for too many older and disabled people, physical access to justice through the magistrates' courts in particular is well nigh impossible because the buildings themselves are not fit for purpose. Not fit for purpose, actually, was the term used to describe the magistrate courts in the Secretary of State's own constituency by the former Police and Crime Commissioner. Really, do we not need more swift action to remedy the problem than the Minister has already outlined?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In fact, I actually took quite a bit of time to read the report from the Magistrates Association on inaccessible courts to ensure that where we can take reasonable adjustments, we take them. Where we need to take more substantial investment to make the courts more accessible, particularly for making it DDA compliant, that we do so and that those works are prioritised. But we are continuing to work on new courts, as in Blackpool and in the City of London, to ensure that the estate is modernised and we have courts that are accessible and fit for purpose. So the point is well made and it is in hand.
Sir Michael Fabricant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question 15.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To preserve the independence of the judiciary, the Lord Chief Justice has a statutory responsibility for the training of the judiciary under the Constitutional Reform Act of 2005. This includes magistrates and their legal advisers. Magistrates and legal advisers who support them in court must complete induction training before hearing cases, and once magistrates are sitting, continuation training is provided on regular cycles. Impartial decision-making is woven throughout all the material.
Thank the Minister for his answer. Chris Pincher and I have been working very closely to ensure that the police act strongly and swiftly in Shenstone, near Lichfield, over constant demonstrations at an Israeli company which supplies arms to the British armed forces. Now, 2 people went to trial at a magistrates' court in Warsaw, and they were acquitted. And it is reported, and we don't know for sure because it's not a court of record, that the judge said on the principle of proportionality, the action was proportionate in comparison to the crimes against humanity which they were acting to stop by the Israelis. I mean, I think that, if it were true, is outrageous. What can be done within the judicial system to ensure that this sort of thing doesn't happen, if indeed it did?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My honourable friend actually raises an important point in terms of the independent judiciary. We do have to be careful that we don't rely on reports by a third party, perhaps with a vested interest, because these cases are not reported officially. However, if my honourable friend wishes to discuss any points of law that may lead to an appeal, then the prosecuting authority can do so, and I'm happy to work with my honourable friend and guide him how that may be taken up with the Attorney General. But also, in terms of any complaints about the behaviour of the judiciary, there is a clearly defined process which I'm very happy to discuss with my honourable friend after today's session.
Question number 16, Mr. Speaker, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At the 30th of June, there were just over 20,000 people working in the probation service, an increase of just over 2,300 or 13% compared to the 30th of June the previous year.
Mr. For its answer, 2 horrific cases of Jordan McSweeney and Damien Bendel show how vital it is to have effective supervision of recently released offenders. So can I ask the Minister what lessons have been learned from those 2 cases, and will he provide an update on the action being taken to address problems in the probation service caused by high vacancy rates and consequentially unmanageably large caseloads for probation staff?
Mr. Speaker, I am very grateful to my right honourable friend. First, may I once again express my sincere condolences to the families of Zara Alina, Terry Harris, Connie Gent and John and Lacey Bennett. We have increased probation staff in the London area by 4.5% over the last year, and that includes 270 trainee probation officers in post. The service has accepted all of the Chief Inspector's recommendations in respect of the 2 appalling cases that she mentioned, and is implementing robust action plans, especially with regard to improving risk assessment.
Question 17.
Mr. Speaker, ministers engage regularly with colleagues in the Welsh Government, including discussions on female offenders and alternatives to custody. Both governments work closely on delivering the female offending women's justice blueprint for Wales.
Short sentences for women often do more harm than good, reinforcing trauma and leading to further reoffending. In 2022, 2/3 of sentences for immediate custody for women were for less than 12 months. And it's anticipated that there will be 1,000 more women in prison by 2026. How does the Secretary of State justify the growing female prison population and use of short sentences, with Wales's ambition to divert many women, as many as possible, away from prison?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the women's population in prison has come down. And sentencing is a matter for the judiciary and not something that government intervenes in. But it is very important that there are suitable alternatives to custody available. And I join with her in paying tribute to people running women's centres, for example, which do a fantastic job specifically for women, as well as the broader set of alternative and community sentence options. And it's very, very important that we make sure we continue to work on those, including together with the Welsh Government.
We unfortunately come to topicals. Dame Neil Griffith.
Question number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I've been asked to reply on behalf of the Lord Chancellor, who has been in Riga attending a Council of Europe meeting where a political declaration was signed on support for the Ukrainian justice system. He is sorry, Mr. Speaker, not to be here for these oral questions. He has asked me to convey to the House his thanks to the Metropolitan Police for their quick work in finding and returning Daniel Khalife to custody. The independent investigation he commissioned must now get to the bottom of this serious breach. Since last orals, the Government has also announced that we will make whole life orders the expectation in sentencing where they can be applied, and we've also outlined plans to order the worst offenders to attend court for their sentencing hearings. We want to ensure that the worst offenders receive their sentences in the full glare of the courtroom, and that victims have the opportunity to set out the impact the crime has had on them.
Much, Mr. Speaker. Well, with government spending for housing legal aid falling in the past decade from 44 million to 20 million, and the spending for disrepair cases from nearly 4 million to just over 1 million, it's not a moment too soon that the government has begun to restore some legal aid with the Housing Loss Prevention Advice Service. But due to the government's disastrous Lapso Act, many housing legal aid providers shut up shop, leaving 42% of the population of England and Wales without a single provider in their local authority area, and 84% with no access to welfare legal aid. So, what recent analysis has the Minister made of legal aid deserts, and what steps is he taking to remedy the situation?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, of course, we are putting more money into legal aid, including criminal legal aid, following the independent review, and specifically on housing that she mentioned, from the 1st of August, injecting an additional £10 million.
Dame Andrew Lidd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I ask my right honourable friend what conversations he's had across government to make sure that the sentencing for those convicted of dangerous cycling is equalised with the sentencing guidelines for those convicted of dangerous driving?
Good question.
Well, I'm grateful to my right honourable friend, who I know takes a keen interest in this issue. The safety of our roads is a key objective for the government. Protecting all road users is a priority. Like all road users, cyclists have a duty to behave in a safe and responsible manner. While laws are in place for cyclists, the current laws are old, and it can be difficult to successfully prosecute offences. That's why DFT colleagues are considering bringing forward legislation to introduce new offences concerning dangerous cycling, to tackle those rare instances where victims have been killed or seriously injured by irresponsible cycling behaviour.
Can I welcome the new Shadow Secretary of State, Shabana Mahmood?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Minister for the update about Daniel Khalife. But, Mr. Speaker, the fact remains that HMP Wandsworth has been a known problem for the best part of a decade, with a litany of failures, including overcrowding, staffing and security issues. And Khalife isn't even the first escape from Wandsworth. There was an incident in 2019, which the Chief Inspector of Prisons said was a result of a serious security breach. Why, after so many warnings about Wandsworth, has the government failed to act?
Well, Mr. Speaker, of course, we take these matters extremely seriously. The question she raised specifically about the 2019 incident will be something, of course, that the independent investigation will look at to make sure that lessons were learned. I do want to say that progress has been made in Wandsworth, including, if you look at the independent review of progress from His Majesty's Inspectorate, and particularly on staffing, which I know has been a matter rightly of considerable public interest. There's been an increase of some 25% in staffing specifically at Wandsworth since 2017.
Years of warnings, Mr. Speaker, and years of inaction. I'm afraid that rather sums this government up. On Sunday, the Justice Secretary told us that 40 prisoners have been moved from Wandsworth, claiming that it was out of, and I quote, an abundance of caution. Can the Minister tell us how many other prisoners will have to be moved across the whole of the prison estate as a result of this escape? Because what the public want to see is not an abundance of caution after the fact of an escape, but an abundance of certainty that the prison estate is secure. Is it?
Mr. Speaker, it is. She wouldn't expect me, I think, to get into a running commentary on transfer arrangements when we're talking about security. I do want to reassure her, this House and the public that escapes from prisons are very rare, and they are much rarer now than they used to be. The number of escapes there have been from prison in the last 13 years, since 2010, is considerably lower than it was in the 13 years before.
Mr.
Speaker, to encourage active travel, people need to feel confident using our roads, yet the courts can only impose the same penalties on multiple offenders as a first-timer. Will my right honourable friend consider the introduction of escalating penalties for repeat traffic offences?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My honourable friend is right to highlight the issue of traffic offences. As part of the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Act 2022, there was an increase in the minimum disqualification periods for the serious offences of causing death by careless driving when under the influence of drink or drugs from 2 to 5 years, and if there is a repeat offence within 3 years, it's increased from 3 to 6 years. The Department for Transport also is currently considering a broader call for evidence on motoring offences, and I hope that the very recent Cycling and Walking APPG report will be useful to them in this respect. I will ensure colleagues at the DFT are aware of her interest in this issue.
Kenny McCaskill.
Terrorist offenders in low-category prisons plays out, is it not time to free up space by removing Julian Assange from Belmarsh Maximum Security Facility, where he's languished since April 2019, guilty only of a minor bail breach when his real offence is exposing war crimes? But regardless of that, or his place of incarceration, will the Minister ensure that he's actually able to attend proceedings in person, which he's been denied since January 2021, given all the comments about people being at court?
Mr. Speaker, I think the honourable gentleman has achieved his objective to get something on the record. I'm not going to comment on ongoing cases, but of course, speaking more generally, access to justice is at the heart of what we do.
I'm Priti Patel.
Speaker, I have a constituent who suffered life-changing injuries as a result of an assault 8 years ago, and she is not on her own on that basis. She was only awarded £150 from a compensation order during the criminal case and offered £1,000 from the CICA. Will the Minister look at amending the Victims Bill so that victims can be given the adequate care, compensation and support through the courts from offenders and, importantly, through the CICA?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful to my right honourable friend, who I know throughout her time in this House, particularly as Home Secretary, always has taken a very keen interest in supporting victims of crime. It is vital that victims get the compensation they're entitled to, be that from the offender or the Criminal Injuries Compensation Scheme, which paid out over £173 million in 2022-23. The making of a compensation order is a matter for the court, and there is no limit on the amount that a court can order an offender to pay. In respect to the Criminal Injuries Compensation Scheme, His Majesty's Government is currently consulting on changes following ICSA's report alongside previous consultations, so it's important this is able to be considered fully, but this will be post-passage of the Victim and Prisoners Bill.
My constituents tells me they're at risk of losing their home because of how long they've had to wait for a benefit decision appeal. Can the Minister outline what steps his department is taking to reduce the current 33-week waiting time for benefit decision appeals to be heard?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Across the whole tribunal process, the team will constantly monitor who are performing nuance and sharing best practice. On a particular case, if the Honourable Lady would like to write to me with the details, I can investigate and see if there's any particular cause of delay.
Parliament
passed a law in 2015 that offenders convicted of a second or subsequent knife offence should go to prison. Yet in the year to March, 1,600 such offenders, 37% of the total, dodged a jail sentence altogether, the highest total since the new law was introduced. Will ministers ensure that the courts now hand down the sentences legislated for in this House 8 years ago?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My honourable friend is right to highlight the scourge that is knife crime and the need for tough sentences for such crime. While sentencing in individual cases is a matter for independent judiciary, who are able to consider the specific circumstances of individual cases, in legislating on this issue, Parliament was clear about its seriousness. This is reflected in average sentences for all types of knife crime up from 6.5 months in 2010 to 8.1 months in 2020, and I would say that 87% of those committing repeat offences were given a custodial sentence, including suspended sentences, which are a custodial sentence.
Mr. Speaker, I have a number of constituents whose asylum appeals have been allowed by the Courts and Tribunal Service, who are then thrust into limbo between the case going back to the Home Office to approve things. What conversations have ministers had with their Home Office colleagues in clearing this backlog that's preventing my constituents from getting on with their lives?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm always happy to look at individual cases to see if there are specific issues why there's a delay, but broadly speaking, I work with colleagues in the Home Office and in the Solicitor General Office to see what we can do to ensure that any delays in the process are smoothed out so that people don't have to wait for their day in court.
Joe Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
review, if any, has the department carried out to ensure that when the courts extend bail, that they are ensuring that the police are dealing with their investigations diligently and expeditiously?
Speaker, my honourable friend raises obviously a point that is of importance to her constituents, but I must stress that the independence of the judiciary is fundamental to the rule of law and to the running of the justice system, and therefore the department hasn't and won't be conducting review in how the judiciary undertake their functions in individual cases, but I can reassure her that the judiciary do ensure that the relevant agencies that they work with undertake their functions smoothly and effectively.
Thank you,
Mr. Speaker. Is it not the case, Minister, that last-minute cancellations in magistrates' courts are largely caused by the inability to recruit and retain legal advisers who are paid a lot less than what other government legal advisers are paid? What steps will the Minister take to ensure that there's an increase in wages, terms and conditions for these legal advisers, and will he sit down with the PCS union to try and resolve this intolerable situation?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We look carefully at why all cases are vacated. In actual fact, the biggest cause of vacation will often be the non-availability of prosecution counsel or defence counsel, not a non-availability of legal executives.
Peter Bottomley.
Can I put to ministers that a 9-month wait for granting simple probate is unfair on people who are trying to sell a parent's home? I've failed to get the government and the probate service to work. My constituent now to the Prime Minister. Will ministers please sort it out?
Mr. Speaker, in fact, the time taken between when the all documents required are received is between 6 and 9 weeks. We always advise that no one should take a decision on the sale of property until probate is granted. But I can reassure my honourable friend that despite a significant increase in applications, the service is recruiting and training up over 100 new caseworkers to ensure that the service does deliver the service that he wants and that I also want.
Kate Lamb.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last month, the United Nations called for an urgent government review of IPP sentences. Will the Secretary of State listen to the UN, and can he explain why the number of people on an IPP sentence recalled to prison without committing any further offence has soared in recent years?
Mr. Speaker, I can confirm that the Lord Chancellor and I and us all are very consciously aware of the issues, the difficulties around the IPP sentence. It's a sentence that would not be introduced today. We did abolish it, as she will know, but there are people in prison who have been recalled or have not been released by the parole board because they've not been considered safe for release. Our objective is to help to manage people towards safe release into the community, and to that end, our recently announced action plan is central.
Mark Eastwood.
Rehabilitation of offenders is so important in reducing the chances of committing crime once released from prison, especially if they can get back into work. Could the Minister outline any schemes that helps give offenders the skills they need and how they can access companies that are willing to give them a second chance in life?
My honourable friend is so right, and in topical questions I haven't time to start to unpack all the different things I would like to say, so I won't. Suffice to say, brilliant companies providing training opportunities. Oh, and others.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've written to the Secretary of State about the tragic case of my young constituent, Greg Maguire, and he has agreed to meet with me, and I'm very grateful. But can I ask the Minister, does his department have any plans to reassess the current rules, which means that victims' families are unable to appeal sentences for those convicted of causing death by careless driving?
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady. I know she's meeting the Secretary of State to discuss this. I don't want to preempt that meeting. If she wishes, I'm very happy to join that meeting with her, or even to meet her separately to talk about this if she feels that would be helpful to her.
Tim Wharton.
Mr. Speaker, you won't believe this. It's almost 6 months since I finally secured a meeting with the Justice Minister and the Health Minister after 6 cancellations about what had happened to Section 4 of my Civil Partnerships Bill empowering coroners to investigate stillbirths. I was assured that this law, passed by this House in February of 2019 with a consultation which closed in June 2019, would imminently be published and progress would be made. Nothing has happened. Is it ever going to happen?
Justice delayed.
Yes, it will, and both the Health Minister and I are pushing this as fast as we possibly can.
Reverend Campbell.
Mr. Speaker, the scale of the illegal drugs problem in prisons was such that 5 years ago the government introduced a programme that cost £100 million. Has the problem got worse or improved in the time since?
Mr. Speaker, I think we are seeing progress. It's a combined approach of having the drug recovery wings, the incentivised, subsidised free living, but also making sure that security to stop drugs getting into prisons. There are things like X-ray body scanners, which we've deployed in many prisons.
Rob Butler.
Mr. Speaker, it is perhaps unfortunate that many members of the public and much of the media only take an interest in prisons when there is an escape, but that is something that is thankfully very rare. Would my right honourable friend join me in hoping to see now a calm and measured public debate about the role of prisons, not least working out ways to improve rehabilitation, which ultimately protects the public?
Mr. Speaker, he is, of course, exactly right, and my honourable friend has a long history in this since before reaching this House. It is ultimately all about rehabilitation, reducing reoffending and helping to keep the public safe.
Joanna Churran.
Mr. Speaker, over 10,000 women have signed a public letter to the Prime Minister asking him to take action against the escalating campaign of threats and intimidation against women who stand up for women's rights. And many of these women are particularly concerned that the institutions supposed to protect them are failing to do so, and that includes the criminal justice system. Would the Minister for Victims be good enough to meet with me and representatives of those who have organised the letter to discuss this important issue?
I'm always happy to meet with the honourable and learned lady.
Robert Neal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The reputation of our justice system depends upon the independence and integrity and professionalism of our judges. At the end of this month, the Right Honourable Lord Burnett of Malden retires as Lord Chief Justice, to be succeeded by Dame Susan Farr, the first ever female Chief Justice. Will he place on record in this House his appreciation and all of our appreciation to Lord Burnett for the exceptional leadership he has shown to the judiciary throughout his term in office?
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend. I know the Lord Chief Justice, and I am very happy on behalf of His Majesty's Government and all those on the front bench to do exactly as he said, pay tribute to his exemplary period as Lord Chief Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to pay tribute to campaigners who have challenged joint enterprise, and as a result, the CPS have now committed to monitor who are prosecuted. And I welcome the report at the end of this month. But can the Minister commit to an audit of all joint enterprise convictions, particularly as more black people are disproportionately impacted by this conviction?
Very good. So I can commit to wait until we've seen what the work being done by the CPS uncovers, and then once we have data, then we can have a rational discussion as to the next steps.
Very Khalife, final question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is the Minister aware of the prevalence of the unfounded and unscientific concept of parental alienation within our family courts? This is causing suffering and in some cases violence against women and girls. So what steps is their department taken to ensure that the courts recognise the harm of this discredited concept of parental alienation?
Mr. Speaker, the Department is well aware of the concerns, and that's why it is currently under review, and the actual results of that review, including publication of all the data and research behind the outcomes, will be published later this year.
Thank you for your Right, that completes questions. We come to the urgent question next.
No, after urgent question.
Urgent question, Ed Miliband.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To ask the Secretary of State for Energy Security and Net Zero if she will make a statement on the implications for offshore wind of the contracts for different CFD allocation round 5.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.